Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce Allison Reyes. And when I first joined the Guild back in 2018, I had the good fortune to see Allison preparing some things for the gathering of the guilds that occurred that first year when we were still doing them live. And I was captivated by her work. And when I became presentation coordinator, I was trying to get her to do a presentation, and she's kind of exceeded my expectations here. And I think you will really enjoy seeing her work with Resin. It's going to be real exciting. So Allison, why don't you tell us how we got going here, and I'll switch over to the PowerPoint, okay?
Okay, great. Well, I'm a visual storyteller, so let's jump to a slideshow, and I'll tell you how I got started and being obsessed with resin, essentially. So really the way I got started is Chris, a young friend, moved to Portland for a tech job, and he needed a desk. So he dragged me to IKEA, and for $400, there was a fake farmhouse table made out of fake wood, and there was just no way this was acceptable. So I convinced him to let me make his desktop, even though I had no idea what I was doing. I orchestrated a desktop for him by cold calling places to see if they had a way to glue the wood up, and it ended up being so much fun that I decided to make a desk for myself. So this time I used reclaimed wood from the Rebuilding Center, and I had the same person join it for me. I think his name was Wood Dave. That's how I had him in my phone. He joined it for me, and shown here, it's with round steel legs. And I had so much fun making this desk. I would get up at 5 in the morning and work on it before work. And next slide shows with a drawer. After I joined the Guild, I learned to make a drawer for it, but I loved making tables. I just didn't know how. So I signed up for a beginning woodworking class at ADX, and really decided to start making tables. So a friend of mine came visiting from Seattle, Molly, and she tells me that her sister and brother-in-law really want a table that looks like a river. And did I want to make it? So yes, I made an arrangement where I got to learn how to do it, and they paid for materials plus a little bonus. And I quickly sourced 16 gallons of resin just so I can get a 10% discount, starting with EX74, which I still use today. And the first thing I did was I made a mold and did a practice table. And my second practice piece, I ended up selling at the Gathering of the Guilds 3.5 years ago. The couple that bought it were thrilled, but I was so green. My friend Alex helped me make those legs. I actually named the table after him, the Montero entry table, because he helped me so much. So when we went and picked out the slab via FaceTime, I had no idea what I was doing. It was too wide for the bandsaw, too thick for the table saw, too heavy for me to lift. I had them drop it off at ADX, and we weren't able to process it. So this is when I found out about creative woodworking. It was a 3-inch thick slab, and I poured 14 layers between the slabs. The resin for the sandbar, or the reason for the sandbar, was to draw your eye away from it to change the shape of the water. And the video that's not, or the picture on the right, on the same slide, is the flood coat over the whole thing. But he was happy with it, and the whole experience took me about 5 months. And something happened while I had all of that resin laying around my studio, And I just started playing with it. And this is a 7-foot piece that I did on Baltic birch because I would cover the table with plywood so dust wouldn't get on it. So I started to resin the plywood, using the resin as the medium by just adding pigments to it. So this is just doing art with the pigments. So this, I'm just having fun to see what happens. And this is a piece using maple for hills and resin for fog. And the next piece is the same concept with maple for hills and resin for fog. I just started really exploring what I can do with the medium. So then I jumped onto canvas. This one's Air Apparent. And I just kept doing it. Resin every day, pouring resin, mixing resin, until I started teaching classes. And here's a little class that I did. Hi, CJ. So let's mix some resin. I have a lot to show. I'm going to do 3 little demos. So, all right. So the first thing I want to do is very table oriented. I want to show you how to fill a knot hole. The first thing I did was clean up the wood, but not too much because there's going to be a lot of cleaning after. One of my newbie mistakes was always finishing wood way too early and then having to refinish it. But what I like to use is sanding sealer. And the reason I like to use sanding sealer is because it's really thin and it dries really quickly and it gets into all the cracks. And I end up doing it on the entire piece because if you drop a drop of resin while you're doing this somewhere else, it's going to be really hard to get out. So I used to only seal the little area, but it just makes sense to go ahead and protect the whole piece. And by the way, I always use sanding sealer when I do resin. It's my favorite. So all I did was vacuum this out, and I kind of picked at all the loose stuff while the vacuum was on. And part of the reason that I'm putting the sealer in here is to prevent, this is one way to prevent bubbles. And also, I don't know if you've ever tried filling a knot hole with resin and the resin just keeps completely disappearing into the wood. But if you don't seal the wood, that's going to happen because resin loves wood. So I think you can go ahead and grab the resin if you don't mind. So this is the bottom of the knot hole. But I'm going to end up taping the top because when I pour it upside down, all the little micro bubbles that I might not be able to catch are going to float up, and it's going to look nicest on the very top this way. So let's just wait for that to dry for a second. Thank you. So I'm going to use this tuck tape, it's called. I actually ordered this from Canada. It's really strong, permanent tape. So you don't want to put it all over your piece because it's really hard to get off. Sometimes I'll put regular painter's tape around and then put this over it so it's easier to get off. But let's just have that. You know, it usually dries instantaneously. But, this tape is, it's not eco-friendly, I'll say, The resins I use are water-based, but you can kind of, this tape has a smell to it. I'm not sure if you could smell that, Bland.
Yeah,
But it's really effective because you don't want this to leak.
Smell-o-vision.
Yeah. So normally I would wait another minute or so for that shellac to dry, but we'll be fine. One thing I will say, I like to use the countertop epoxy for filling knot holes, and I'm going to do it in more than one layer. Not tonight. I'm just going to show you what I would do, and then you just do the same process again. I just have more control over it. It's a nicer product than the 2-to-1. We're going to be using both. Okay. See how sticky this is? I let it feed back on itself. There it is.
Want me to go to 2? Camera 2?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the last little bit. Okay, so that's ready to go. A lot of times, people wonder what happens when resin gets old. This is what happens. This is my daughter's resin. It's 2 years old now, and it started to yellow the hardener a little bit. That's fine. It's still going to work fine. The only time you would be concerned about that is if perhaps you're doing a white counter or something, but we're going to be tinting it all kinds of colors, so it's not going to matter. Before I resin, I prep the room. And it's important to have a very clean room. I sweep it the day before so I'm not kicking up dust. I have an air purifier. And if you don't have an air purifier, you can actually use water to clean the air like this. It's very effective. Just kind of gets the dust particles down. You don't want to ever touch the resin, so you always wear gloves, even though it's water-based. Keep pets out of the room. We have a pet-free household, and that's not due to our lease. Don't wear clothes you care about. Have a respirator on hand. If I'm doing large amounts, I will use the respirator using large pieces, but for today, I'm going to talk without it. Safety glasses, apron, towels, paper towels. Have everything ready before you mix your resin. These paper towels are not equal, and you don't want to use that kind. This kind is lint-free, and it really matters sometimes. I mean, for a knot hole, maybe not so much, but these are a good investment. And you want to make sure for larger projects that you have a level surface. Resin's always going to level out. And even for a knot hole, it's important because you can think you have it all filled, come back the next day, part of it is filled. And good ventilation is also important. I have tall ceilings, I have the window open. Sometimes I have a fan going. And that's about it for getting the room ready. So let's mix some resin. This is EX74. It's an affordable resin. There'll be a link. It's no VOC. It sets up in a couple hours, you know, really overnight. You can work it for a couple of hours. There are more bubbles than the more expensive resin. This is about $65 a gallon, and the other resin I use is about $130, just to give you a difference on price. And when I mix the resin, I like to use the hardener first because it's thinner. And this is a 1-to-1 resin. So what I like to do is just use paper cups, and I'll use the same one and go to the same amount. It's the easiest way to measure and get it accurate for me. You don't want to use wax. I have warmed my resin in an infrared sauna. Now, you might not have an infrared sauna, but you can always use a sink full of warm water. If the resin is warmer, you're going to get less bubbles, and bubbles can be a problem, really in particular with the less expensive resins. Or this one. It's not a problem if you know about it ahead of time and you just warm it up. So I have the advantage of having been a pastry chef, and I'm really good at stirring. I didn't know how many, the skill set, how it crosses over to woodworking is pretty funny to me, but stirring the resin is really critical. And if you're new to mixing resin, I'll have some special tips for how to do it properly, but I'll show you how I do it first. So now we have the same amount of resin and hardener in here, and I'm going to mix it by hand. When you are mixing it, when it's not done, which it clearly isn't done here because it takes a couple minutes, but you can kind of see a stringiness to it. It's going to get completely clear. Can you see that, Bland? It will get completely clear. And what you want to do is make sure that you are getting all the sides and the bottom. And what I tend to do is I find the seam of the cup, and that's where I will wipe my stick. That way I know where it's going to be sticky, and that's where I'll pour from. So, you know, getting messy is part of the resin game. So this does mix. Usually I listen to music when I mix resin, and I will mix it for a whole song. However, this is a music-free presentation. So while I'm mixing it, what will I tell you? If you're new to mixing resin, what you're going to want to do is mix this for a couple of minutes and then pour it into another completely clean container and then continue mixing. That's just going to assure that it's mixed properly. If it's not mixed all the way, you're going to have some problems. It could be sticky, or it could just not cure, or it can have divots when it's finished. So it's very important.
Allison, someone's wanting to know the type of music and the length of the song. Is it pop music in 3 minutes, or is it Beethoven in 30?
I usually listen to the Leon Redbone station, and I would say 2 minutes is going to be, well, until it's done is the correct answer, but it could take about 2 minutes. But you're going to mix it until you don't see that stringiness anymore. And let's see how we're at here.
And does by heating the resin, is that affecting your cure time somehow?
It will. I heated this. I had it in the sauna for about an hour at 110, and it just made it nice to mix. But yeah, it is going to cure a little faster because of that. If the resin is,
what's the normal cure time on the working time on your resin?
Well, I use 3 different kinds. So the working time on this is about an hour and a half. And then I also like to use stone coat, and the art coat is probably 3 hours. And then the eco epoxy, it's like 12 hours, but you can't really do anything with that. You just kind of pour it and wait. So, but it stays really running for 12 hours.
Could you heat it in an oven? I mean, like a real slow oven, like a keep warm or something?
Maybe, but just a sink full of hot water will do it, I think. All right, so this is way too much to fill the knot hole, but we're going to do another project too. So I am going to, I didn't want to take away the color part of the next project. So while we have all this resin, I'm going to mix some colors for our next demo. This is Just Resin. This is an Australian product of a very highly pigmented, beautiful pigment paste, they're calling it. And I'm just gonna put a little bit in these cups.
The pigment itself.
You know, I believe there is a little bit of resin in here, and that's why it blends so flawlessly with epoxy. You can use almost anything to color resin, but your results will vary. You can use acrylic paint, but sometimes it might be a little tiny bit chunky. And these are about $8 each, but they have to ship from Australia. The shipping is not terrible. But they come in more of the artist colors. Tap Plastic also has some epoxy colorant, but they're more 70s toy colors. I have them all in here. Kind of more like the, I don't know. I like to have all the colors. Sometimes you need, but these are, we're going to have these mixed on the side while I'm doing my other project.
Can you use like wood dyes or anything like that? Or
yeah, I have used silk dye, which is kind of fun, but I kind of go back to using the real thing because it just mixes so nicely. Sometimes there'll be little chunks of color. I mean, it depends on what you're doing and how much it matters.
where do you get these swell colors?
There will be a link, but these are from Australia. Just Resin, it's called. These are going to be mixed on the side here. Will my lovely assistant please step up and mix the resin colors? And of course, we're going to do one with mica powder.
Do you want me to start?
Yep.
Okay.
So mica, oh, one of the best things, baby wipes. This is a tell-all tale of epoxy. And baby wipes are just priceless because you can keep your gloves going for so long and it's just such a sticky situation. So
Is that because it's the water-based epoxy that you're able to clean your gloves like that?
I've never used epoxy that was not water-based. So I don't even know, I don't know how the other would react, but you can just wipe it off with a baby wipe. It's great. All right, let's get this open with gloves on. So now that my gloves are wet, it's super fun to try to open this. I don't have it actually. Let's see. Can I have an assistant open the?
Let's see if I can do this.
All right, and so now that this is dry and ready, I'm also going to mix some, just a little bit. What I like to do for knot holes is put just a tiny bit of black so it looks like a shadow. Thank you so much. Let's see. This is, let's use one. I've filled some pretty deep knot holes just with clear, and it's interesting. It's almost like you're seeing something you're not supposed to see when you can see deep into the wood like that. I don't know. All right, here's some black. This is a black from Tap Plastics, which is our local place. They also have a lot online. Struggling. So my table is made out of HDPE. This is too much. That is enough. Okay. But the real amount out of all of this is going to be this much, more than enough. I just want a kiss of it because I want it to be transparent. And just having a little bit of shadow. And you can do whatever you want. This is what I do. You do want to mix it thoroughly or you get little lines in there. Okay, I think that is good. And so I am going to pour this right in, but I'm not going to fill it all the way because this is countertop epoxy. And if you were to pour this all the way, it would be too thick. It would heat up, it would smoke, might catch on fire. We don't want any of those things.
What's countertop epoxy?
It's the 1-to-1 ratio epoxy that's meant to pour about 1/8 of an inch thick. Though some people have been known to get away with 1/4 inch.
Okay, thanks.
And the 2-to-1 epoxy, which we're going to demo later, you can pour 2-3 inches thick depending on what kind you get. So this is the start to filling the knot hole. And especially because EX74, I'm just going to kiss it with a torch to pop any of the bubbles, but so what's nice about the top being on the bottom is that all the bubbles are rising. So once you have your finished piece and this is filled all the way up and you flip it over and start sanding, it's going to be really nice. So to continue this, you would just literally in 3 hours, you can put another layer. If you were in a hurry, you can do 3-4 layers in one day. But this is my preferred way to fill a knot hole.
So this is the bottom side.
That is the bottom side. So we are now done with the knot hole. Can I have an assistant come grab that away? I have assistants.
I've got 3. What are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah, we are.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Those Rockler cookies?
Oh, those are Rockler cookies. Could you
Did you
put
win
that on
them?
the
Did you
back
win them
table
in a
instead of the
raffle?
beast? I have won cookies at a raffle. I always want to win the cookies at the raffle. I never have enough cookies. I love them. All right, so this is the next demo. This is a table that's going to look like a river. And what I have done to get ready for this, I will share with you by way of a slideshow, and then we'll go ahead and do a color code. So,
Allison,
yes?
one quick, before we leave the knot hole, did you only fill the knot hole 1/4 inch or did you fill it up to the top?
I only filled it a little less than 1/4 inch, and then you would just keep layering it. I use the 1-to-1 epoxy because I feel like it's a better product for a knot hole.
Yeah.
And so what you
Great.
would do is just keep layering it until you get to the top. Sorry, thanks for clarifying.
You're a very patient person.
I am, but I just think it's better. I mean, the 2-to-1 epoxy has a huge learning curve, and it's so runny, and there's just so many problems with it. I really like the control of using the thicker 1-to-1 and just going a layer at a time. And you could do 4 layers in a day if you're using the EX74 because it, hardens in a couple of hours. Just throw a little bit more on. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so to get this ready, I cleaned it up and I actually, this is the bottom part, I put some wax all around the edges. Let me grab my little cards. And that way, when I caulk it, the caulk will come off easier. Sometimes, yeah, this is what you learn with experience here. The other important thing to note is that I'm using clear caulking because sometimes if there's white or color, a little tiny piece of it will end up in your table. You wouldn't want that to be part of the story. So when you're applying the caulk, you need to go beyond the edge where the resin's going to go. And then I go ahead and go all the way around so the piece stays level. Here's a little bit of squeeze out, but not the kind you want. But because it's clear, it doesn't look clear, but it does dry clear. I was able to just kind of clean this up with a little popsicle stick and it dried and it's fine. But you're aiming to get it far enough away that when you press it down on the table, you don't get a lot of squeeze out. Then I just had some offcuts because I wanted this to be fairly circular and I put some of that fancy Canadian tape on there, but really packing tape would work. You don't have to have the fancy stuff. And I went ahead and caulked that down. I have some underneath and on the sides and going up the side of the round table. And I just kind of pressed that in. You never want to be impatient and pour the same day. And you also don't have to have a table made out of HDPE. You could just take a piece of plywood and put some tape down on it and reuse it. I don't really like having disposable molds, and something as simple as a piece of Baltic birch with tape on it you can use at least 20 times. So that's what we did to get ready. And also making sure that this was all vacuumed. Anything that you see in here is just part of the table. Mm.
Okay.
As part of the demo, I'm actually going to put this 1-to-1 resin really thick in this cup and set it aside till the end of the demo to show you what happens. This is the mica powder. I don't know if you can see stirring that, but it's the same stuff they make eyeshadow out of. I'm sure it's just so fun to watch it blend. I'm not a huge user of mica powder, but with water, it does kind of make it glisten. And what I'm going to demo here is just kind of doing a color coat with multiple colors because I love colors. When I'm doing something artistic, I always kind of hold out some of the color in case I want it later.
This is 1-to-1 resin also,
It is. I mixed it all at the same time. This is the same.
Isn't that thicker than, is that too thick or no?
No, this is just a color coat on the bottom. And then what I like to do, where do I look? Okay. What I like to do is a color coat on the bottom, and then once that hardens, I'll do clear up the side so you can actually see the edge of the burl so it doesn't get lost. But this is fine. Oops. See, this is why I sealed. Sealing, so good.
Good job. Go to one.
So all of this wood has been sealed. And what I'm going to do is manipulate this with a heat gun. And it see that little floater? Will come right out.
What was that?
It was a little piece of wood floating in there.
Oh, okay.
Try to get all the loose pieces.
Does the heat gun do the same thing as the torch?
It does not. The heat gun pushes it around. It also can pop bubbles, but it's moving the resin, and you can push the colors on top of each other with it. The torch is more for just surface bubble popping. All right, we're not going to spend
For one, Joe.
too much on this, but I want to show you something really cool. Well, let's do a little white here. How am I doing on
Back to
time?
two.
Can I do a cool little
Yeah,
trick?
you got 2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes left.
All right. So if you take a little bit of the resin, my favorite thing is with the white,
Yes, please.
and mix it with alcohol. So it's really thin. Does take a second to mix this. Sure. We're going to mix this until it's all even, and I'm going to blend in this little white part, and I'll show you what happens. See how I'm not able to kind of get into this corner just with a heat gun? You can manipulate it with stick is really the most common cool thing to do, I think, to kind of get it away from the edges. And then blowing. I am going to torch the surface just to pop into those bubbles that I'm creating. By the way, this is so fun. Okay. So this is the white with some alcohol in it. I always have my gun on high, ready in one hand. I'm just going to pour a little bit of this and then just blow it around. And it really gives it this water effect. Look how it's still moving.
What does the alcohol do?
It just thins it and disperses it and it kind of keeps it moving. I just wanted to do kind of a more natural river color. Just gives this very thin layer. I feel like that's looking pretty water-like. Fun. Okay, color coat. So the reason I do that with the 1-to-1 resin, one beautiful thing that just happened is now I know that my nothing is leaking. If there was a leak, it wouldn't be a big deal at this point. Once this hardens, then I'm very confident filling it to the top with the 2-to-1 resin, the thicker pour, and then you'll be able to see everything that's going on in there. So that's how I like to do it.
So we go clear from here up.
Clear from here up.
Allison, I've only done one table with a couple of practices, and when I mixed some colors, they looked so cool, and by the time they hardened, they had all blended completely and were dull as dishwater.
So what type of resin were you using? Do you know if it was, I mean, not what brand, but was it 1-to-1 ratio
Yes.
or 2-to-1?
Yes, it was 1-to-1. It was an
And were the colors
epoxy resin, I think.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go on a limb and say were the colors mica powder based colors?
Yes.
So what happens with mica powder is it's gonna sink to the bottom. So it's gonna look really, really cool. And you have to come back and reactivate it so they'll float to the top again.
Oh,
One thing, which camera am I looking at? Here?
yes.
Okay. So when you feel this relief when you're done with your color coat, you feel like it's looks good or with whatever part, and then you feel like you're done. You really have to come back and check on it and kind of babysit it. I mean, sometimes I'm up at 2 a.m. and getting out of bed and coming down and making sure there's not a leak or that it still looks the way that I want it to. But mica powders do tend to kind of float to the bottom. Sorry that happened to you.
Thank you.
Somebody's asking, Allison, somebody's asking approximately how much more resin is required for this pour? A gallon, half a gallon?
I would say probably 1.3. It's always more than you think. I would say close to 1.5 gallons for this one. And what I've done it both ways, but my preferred thing is to leave the wood natural. So once I pour it all the way to the top, I would then sand it and use Osmo on the wood, and use Osmo across the whole thing. So, all right. Well, since this is such an epoxy day, I want to talk about 10 different ways you can use epoxy with a slideshow. That is not the 10 ways slideshow. Okay. So while he is looking for that, found it. Okay, so waterproofing. Great way to use epoxy. This was a customer that needed a table for a bathroom. I encapsulated some fiddleback maple in resin and did it with a matte finish. Very happy. Next, stabilizing. So this is a table that I am still working on, and I love it so much. And there's steel rods going into both of the toes of those legs, but it was wobbly. So I took the base to the fabricator, got thicker steel, and guess what? Still wobbly. So next slide. This is epoxy clay. I don't know if that's exactly what it's called, but I'll show you what it is. And I just kind of stabilize the whole piece by being able to have the toad touch the base and stuck it in there. And I'm going to take my Dremel and make it look more like stone. And that is why it's not done. Okay, next, fixing mistakes. So I was steam bending these legs. If you knew me as a new guild member, once I found out there was such a thing as steam bending, anytime anyone came to the guild, I'd say, let's do steam bending. Do you know how to do it? Let's do it. Let's do it. Finally, I talked someone to doing it with me, and each one of these legs broke as we were bending them. It wasn't air dried, and you could hear the crack. You could hear the crack of my heart. And I thought I was going to have to redo the whole thing, but instead I just fixed it with dark epoxy. Sold the table. Happy customer. How about as a, actually, gosh, is this where the slide is? Filling voids. I mean, this is an ant-eaten piece of really cool wood. What else would anyone do with this? Like, I don't even know what else you would do with this besides fill it with resin. Anyhow, maybe someone else would have a different idea, but okay, next. This is also filling things. Those were cookies. Oh, back for 1 second. These were just wood cookies that always tend to have cracks if you don't dry them properly. I bought them with cracks, filled the cracks, cut out some shapes. I love it for that. Okay, decorative element, splash of color to your woodworking, resin for that. Okay. Making games. You can make games out of wood and resin. Craig Jones and I did those together. Okay, next. Inlay. Very cool thing to do with resin. Just CNC anything that you want, fill it with resin. There you go. Here is another example of inlay. This table had a painterly center that was very unsatisfying and 70s to 80s looking, and I just ended up cutting it out with CJ, thank you, and filling it with resin after I decorated it. How about bug preservation? This was an accident, and that is a joke. Poor little guy. Okay, so joinery. This is actually a table where I used resin as the joinery by cutting those square holes all the way through. And then on the bottom side, on the left side of the slide, there's channels so the resin could fill the channels and be joined in the center, as you can see more clearly on the next slide. Well, kind of clear, but this is joined with resin. On the other side of the slab, I just put 3 crooked holes in, so when the resin filled in, it wouldn't be able to separate. But joinery. How about a little shine? This is a piece I made for my beach mother, and I just put some resin as shine on that top edge because it's a water piece to me, and it just kind of helped enhance that. Being creative, burning stuff. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
No, you have changed slides. Oh, okay. All right. Next.
Is that the one you want?
It's fine. We'll go with this one. And finally, tables that look like rivers can also be used with resin. This was a customer had their own wood. They had sunk it in a pond for 7 years, so it would spalt. Then they were storing it and it caught on fire. And they called me over for a consult and said, what should I do with this wood? And he actually had the idea of doing a table that looks like a river. And then I did it for him. And there he is on the next slide. Oh, there I am doing it. I took a color picture and made prints and showed him all the different ways the water could look. And he chose this one. So you can see on my workbench, there's the picture of the table on that bottom left corner. And I'm copying it by doing it live. And the next one, he's not enjoying it yet. But this is one thing to not do with resin. it's not really good with small cracks. This is an old beam. I tried to fill it with resin with all the small cracks over and over and over, and just keeps falling out. And I think what would be good for this is one of those with the cactus juice and the little, you put it in the little pressure. I don't do that. I'd love to hang out with someone who does that, and I'd love to do this with them.
You're talking about a pressure pot?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I haven't practiced that yet. So yes, end of that slideshow. That's
Someone was asking how you got the matte finish on your countertop.
I sanded it and then I waxed it with Osmo matte. Osmo is, let's see if I have a can of it around here. I always do. With this, am I at the right camera? This. I love Osmo. I know there's other finishes, but it's wax. It just felt so wonderful. But if I just finished it with wax, yeah. And there's choices on shiny wax, matte wax. So, so this camera needs to go on because I'm going to unveil the last part of the 3-part demo. You got it?
Yeah.
So we are going to pour this.
Hooray.
So that last table that looked like a river, I did an enormous wood trade, and I got a lot of burl and some walnut slabs. And as soon as I sliced this up, it screamed octopus. And I've really been wanting to do this for a long time. So I will show you what I did to get this far, so you're not out of the loop. And then we're going to mix the 2-to-1 resin and pour it in here, and then we can go to questions. So, second part of presentation 2.
Joe, you're on.
That is it. All right. So, and while I look for my baby wipes right here, these are the tools that I use to just get the wood ready. If you haven't used natural wood, it's actually pretty nasty sometimes, and there's fungus and mold and all kinds of joys. I wear a mask. And we're going to go through this fairly quickly, but here is kind of a before and after, just how far I took the edges. I rarely use a metal brush because they tend to scratch the wood. So I just clean it until it's pleasing to the eye, not sterile looking, you know, whatever your style is. So here's the before and here's the after, pretty similar. Yet if you look on the workbench, you can see all the stuff I kind of found that didn't belong. So bug stuff. Please don't tell me what this stuff is made of, but there's usually some bug stuff, and it comes out pretty easily with kind of an ice pick. And here's the after. Got to get that out. It really floats. Here I'm sanding where the Mirka couldn't reach. That's the head of the octopus, which was another burl. That just happened to look like the head of an octopus. And then here is a huge important part of the process. I stared at this really for a long time. And at this point, it looked like a crab and it was all wrong. And so I switched it all around and I stared at it like this. And that didn't look right either. And so when I finally got it the way I wanted to, I actually kind of screwed the pieces together so I wouldn't have to do that. I did that. I mean, I got it the way I liked it, probably 3 separate times, put it all in a box, got it home, couldn't figure it out. So I screwed it together, and this is me leaving the guild. That's in my trunk. That was the final way. And then I did the sanding sealer on both sides. This again is really great for preventing bubbles. Seal the wood, or they're just going to keep coming when you're sleeping. It's going to happen. So then here is Joe and I taking this lawn edging, which I've never used before, and making this mold. It was oval, and he was kind enough to make an oval jig so I can get this down to the table easier, which is happening right here. I caulked it down once it was strapped to the jig. The jig was just an oval piece of plywood, and certainly waited more than one day. I used this rocket release. This is nasty stuff. Do not breathe. But, you know, sometimes I use things like that. I got that at Tap Plastics. Then I actually put a layer of resin, the 1-to-1 resin, on the bottom for more than one reason. I wanted this to be encapsulated, so now there's resin on the bottom. I also wanted to make sure that the mold would not leak. So now the resin goes all the way to the edges of the mold, and the only place it could potentially leak is where I joined it. So I put a mountain of caulk there several times. Okay, and see, respirator. That's me being a good girl. Yeah. The only thing I didn't tell you, I think that's the end of the slide, is, and I did this today, I went ahead and I used this epoxy clay to secure this to the bottom, because I had this realization that we could pour all the epoxy in here and then this thing could float. So I did secure it down, because we don't want that kind of thing to happen. I'm fine with this spill, but yeah, I don't want this spill. So I'm going to get some gloves on and get this mixing.
And how much will you be mixing? 5 gallons worth at least?
Actually just 3. I'm not going to go all the way to the top.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to do a little less than 3 and hope that it just kind of hits. The head is going to come right out of the center, because I just think it's going to look better that way. Everyone's going to touch it. They're going to sit at this table and they're going to go, ah. Okay. So, so this is the eco epoxy that I'm busting into right now. It sits around without being used for long periods of time. So you always want to clean the top. You don't want anything getting in your resin. And it's very, very heavy. So I have it on the stand, and I'm just going to tilt it. Nah. So I'm aiming for the top of the sticker, because you just need a visual aid. I'm pretty close. I'm going to put a little bit more in there. No, this doesn't have to be warm. This is really runny. This is really different. I know that I'm sure there's some nasty ingredients in here, but it's a water-based epoxy. 2 of the ingredients are soy and flax. So I've never had any problem. There we go. I have the safety sheets on all the epoxies I use, if anyone's curious about that. A little bit more. All right, well, it's so quiet. I would be able to answer questions if that
Well,
makes sense.
Someone asked earlier, and if you're willing to take some questions, when you, on the mica that you said settles, and you go in and you raise it, how do you do that without disturbing your pattern?
Well, at that point, your pattern is flat, so you just make your pattern again. So if you've made a really cool pattern and you go back and it's not there anymore, you just have to do it again. So sad, but it's good practice.
I see
And
you
again,
using,
probably and again and again.
I see you using lots and lots of plastic containers. How do you clean them afterwards?
You know, the cured epoxy will just peel right out. They can wipe, like I'm definitely going to be reusing this bucket. I'll be reusing this, even though I got it today for today. This will just wipe out. With this bucket, it's going to harden. There'll be a thin layer and you can just, it's kind of fun. It's like when you have glue on your fingers in kindergarten and it dries. It's that same type of thing in the bucket and you just peel it out. And then I usually use the paper cups. Okay, so this is going to be mixed by my lovely assistant.
On the
For about 3 minutes, and then I'll come over here. Is that
on the river table pour that you did, the color, was that color on the going to end up being on the bottom of the table or the top of the table?
that is the bottom.
And then when you're sanding, what grit are you typically sanding to?
I sand to 1,000.
And do you wet or dry sand?
I wet sand with a Mirka with the little sheets. This camera? I never know where to look. Yeah, what's hard about sanding resin is it clogs the papers really quickly. And so you kind of want to have a dry rag in one hand and just keep it clean as you're sanding it and try to get as much life as you can out of the papers.
Okay. There's lots of anticipation, lots of excitement on this live pour here, just so you know.
Oh, good. It's very exciting in my studio right now.
When you wet sand, are you using just water as on top when you're sanding?
Sorry?
Or are you just using water when you're wet sanding? You said
I don't wet sand.
Oh, you don't? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just use, thanks to the guild, I was really able to try that Mirka sander and fall in love with it. And so that's the one I chose over Festool. And I use it all the time. And that's what I use to sand. With the Abernet sheets. Yeah, they're right there. I want to pull one out. I don't know if you guys, some people don't even realize we have a very nice sander at the guild. And these are the sheets that go with it. Let's see if my sander is right down here. I kind of have an old lady reason that I like it. I have arthritis and it's really easy to handle. But these are the sheets that I use. This one's 500, but they're great.
You can wash them out.
Huh?
Can you wash them out?
You can blow them out with an air hose.
Yeah, they last a lot longer with wood than with the resin. What will happen is it'll all kind of make a little lump and start scratching. You just have to be really careful. If you want a shiny finish on your resin, you could just do a top coat of resin and let it cure and it would be shiny. But I prefer matte. I've kind of done them both ways. What's nice, if you do a top coat and you want a matte finish, you won't go through too much paper. You're going to start out with 1,000. In fact, I could do, here's a shiny, and this is 500. I could show you how quickly you can turn something matte while we mix that resin. Kind of does before. Can you see that?
Get this one over here.
All right.
Go to 2, Joe.
All right. So here is shiny. Oh, let me have a little something to wrap this around. I know. Rockler. Well, not really a great camera demo, but it's pretty simple. At Gathering of the Guilds, last time we had a live one, I actually did this in the morning on a whole piece before we opened, just by hand. But it's pretty easy to knock the shine off. I just don't make it look easy now because I'm on camera.
Let's go back to 1, Joe. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Ed, you asked a question about the Mirka mesh. I had just been working on a table that's maple and resin, and I found out that if you use a Mirka mesh, it does clog up with the resin, but if you take an air hose and blast it while it's still on the sander with the vacuum going, you can blow just about all that stuff off and keep using that Mirka pad.
Nice. I love those. All right, so I feel like it's probably been a couple minutes. We should see how it, thank you so much. I feel so spoiled. Does it look right?
Okay, let's go to 2.
Do it a little bit more because you're on camera. So if you ever watch those videos where people are making tables with all the epoxy, they usually throw some mica powder in here. I'm doing clear. I'm so glad no one asked me how I determined exactly how much epoxy to use. I really had to Google and then take an educated guess because I have no idea how much of this wood is taking up space. I do know how many times I have vacuumed this out. Many, many times. Yes, this has already been, Joe's asking a question. Have I sealed the mold? The answer is hell yes.
And the wood, silver wood.
I sealed the wood as well. It was in the slideshow.
Yeah, I
Sealed
was
on
going to
both
say,
sides.
Joe, didn't you watch the slideshow?
Did you watch the slideshow, Joe? All right. I think we're good. By the way, with this type of, oh, let's see how this is doing. So this is the 1-to-1 ratio. Ooh, feel that. It's hot.
Ow, that
Ow.
is really hot.
I know. This is bad. Never do a deep pour with the wrong resin. Look at this. Already what we mixed earlier. Mm-hmm.
That's hot too.
Bland, let's see inside the table, the color pour table.
I used a silver gray, white, and sage, and mica powder. And because this is poured thinner, it's not going to be seized up already. I probably still have time to manipulate this.
Yeah.
Are you trying to get more of the blue and the sage visible?
Yes. But it does look primarily lighter colors with the white and the alcohol on top. I'm going to bleach this maple as well. I just have big leaf maple is too orange for me.
Do you have
And
any sage left? Can you put a little bit of sage on there and then kind of show it? as it goes
Sure.
on top?
Sure. In fact,
What's the blue? Yeah, the dark.
oh, see, it was too thick.
Too thick? Okay.
Yep, so it seized up.
All right.
Yep. Okay, this is the grand finale. We're going to pour this. Let's see if I can lift it. Let's, okay. There's kind of a floater in here. Do you want to see that?
Hold the bucket if you want.
It's possibly part of the bucket. I got a quote nice bucket. Okay. So with this type of resin, it stays really thin for about 12 hours. So if you have a leak in your mold, you're not sleeping that night. And if this ends up being a little bit shy, I can mix more off camera and fill it because I had to do some guessing. It looks like it can use even more. A pro tip would be to have another project ready for resin. And I didn't have that project ready, so I kind of went shy.
Quite a few bubbles over here.
Lots of bubbles. So these bubbles kind of pop on their own because there's such a long wait time, but you can hit them with a torch. What you don't want to do is over torch them or you're going to get it too.
Let's just right over here so we can see.
Okay.
What happens with over torching?
We can see a couple bubbles like from the front underneath the head, but I don't know if you can see them from your angle.
Okay.
There they are.
Thank you.
See underneath there.
All right, look at this. So all of these were popped. These bubbles are coming from the resin soaking into the wood, and bubbles are just kind of coming up. See how they're growing right out of that crack? And as it saturates, it will stop. But you kind of always have to.
This one right down in here, you can see the same thing.
So it's more important to really be on top of bubble popping with the other type of, this is going to be 12 hours of runny. If I got paranoid and kept torching this, it's going to cure faster on the top, and then the bubbles will be trapped. So I pop them a little bit, and then I just kind of let it chill. And I will be, when we're off camera, mixing another 1.5 gallons of resin to pour in this bad boy. So the other thing to do now is I cleaned the wood. Now I've got to look for little floaters, or it's going to become part of the story.
Now, when you finish this, how far up this will you go? All the way? Or?
No, I'm just going to go just, yeah, the head's going to be sticking out.
Okay.
So.
And Allison, are you going to provide a link on the brand of epoxy that you have, or?
I do. I have a link on all three. The one I didn't use is Stone Coat. Where am I looking? Or it's looking at this. Perfect. Look at this. The three I tend to use, this is the Eco Epoxy. I have a link for all, but the link for the Eco Epoxy is just Amazon. But Stone Coat Countertops has a really nice epoxy. It's heat resistant up to 500 degrees. It's water-based, no VOC, Oregon company. And that's about 130 plus shipping per gallon, but it's a really nice product. And the open time is a lot longer. And then also this EX74 I get from a little place in Chico, California. Few products. So I have a link for that as well.
We'll put all that stuff in Sunday's email.
Okay.
In
Sunday's email, we will have all of the links, even for the colorants. This Just Resin is that Australian company. If you like colors, they have really nice colors.
Allison, we want to make sure that you take some pictures of the final product and either send them so that we get them in the newsletter or put them on our Facebook page.
Okay. Great. I have to, once it's demolded, I mean, it's still a process. They make it look so easy in those 90-second videos of how to make a huge table, right? But it's probably going to be a couple months before this whole table is finished. After it's demolded and it's all sanded and waxed and beautiful, then I have to stare at it and figure out the base. So.
Is this your first octopus table?
This is my first octopus table.
You've been working on this thing for months. You worked on this before COVID.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I came up with
Remind me tomorrow at 10:30
Yeah.
to send a link to Bland for the weekly blast.
Yeah. So it'll be in the
Yes,
weekly
it will be in the weekly blast. Gosh, did I tell you guys everything? Is there anything else that you want to know?
Allison, you talked about not using it for micro cuts. What's the smallest channel you can use?
Set her up for tomorrow. To
What's the
remind me to send a note to Bland. Time.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
I think that was some background noise.
Oh, I thought someone
Something, but the question was, what's the smallest knot, I think you will fill. Is that, if I understood that correctly?
Not exactly a knot, but I turn wood and you have cracks. What would be the smallest you can use? Because I've been using just 2-part epoxy with a little coloring in it, and I was wondering whether I could use this.
Well, this is a lot thinner, so this would fill cracks better, but it takes longer to cure. But the 2-to-1 is a lot thinner. I mean, it's just going to soak into the wood. This might be better, but I thought there's this team of epoxy people that use those little pressure pots, and I think that might be a way to go. I'm not sure. I haven't really played with that yet. But for sure, the 2-to-1 is really thin and can get into hairline cracks. The smallest crack I would fill, let me step off camera 1 second, and I'll show you the crack I didn't fill for the demo. Oh.
You had in your slideshow some end grain or something that you said was too small to fill.
So I was looking around for knot holes for the demo, and here's a little tiny one. And I thought, you know, that might be too small for this thicker 1-to-1 epoxy. So then I found that gargantuan one. I kind of wish I had a medium one.
Someone's wanting to know if you ever vibrate the resin to get rid of the bubbles.
You know, I thought of that, and I have kind of a vibrating machine. It's a buffer, but it's really big. I almost did that for a table, but no, didn't follow through. Really, the first way to not have bubbles is warming the resin if you're doing the 1-to-1. That really is effective. And then if I just lightly torch, that's usually all I need. Oh, splendidtables.com or resinstudio.com. And also on the 26th, I'm doing a art resin class here, and there's 2 spots left. What's cool about the art resin class is you learn to mix resin and play with it, and you can use my studio to experiment with the colors. If you have a project that you want help with, that's also something I do.
We'll put the announcement for the class in the newsletter too.
Okay.
So,
Sunday class.
yeah.
And just so the guys behind the scenes don't feel left out, there are some kudos going out to the IT video group that are out there tonight. Thank you.
Yeah.
Allison, if we have projects that we'd like help with, do we contact you on email?
Yes, you can contact me on email or through my website. Give me a call. I think my phone number is actually in the directory.
Thank you. That was a wonderful class.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
This was fun.
well, thank you very much, Allison. This has been really informative. I learned a lot, even though people have accused me of not paying attention to the slideshow. And it was everything I'd kind of hoped for. And thank you very much. And people should get a hold of you if they want to take your class, or if they have questions. And great job. Thank you very much.
All
Thanks a
right.
lot,
Well,
Allison.
thanks, everyone.
I thought that was a really well done presentation. It was very thorough, and I certainly enjoyed it. I think it's something you could take on the road. Thanks a lot for
There
doing
was
it.
70 slides. I'm a visual storyteller.
Yeah, I like slides. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
I spilled this
Thank
on
you.
purpose. Okay. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.